A Traveler in Time by Alison Uttley. Chapter 10. I sat at the end of the kitchen garden one day, shelling peas for dinner. The great market basket heaped with new peas stood on the ground near me. It was very hot, and the sun drew out the strong odors of rue and wormwood from the bushes at my feet. The heavy, pungent smell made me think of the other household, and even as I thought of them, I saw Frances standing near, sharpening a dagger on the grindstone. The whir of the stone and the hiss of the blade were familiar sounds to me, for often in the same place I had watched Uncle Barnabas grind the axe and put an edge to his tools on the same old stone. Francis did not see me at first, and I sat watching him as he stooped in his green riding suit, with leather belt round his waist and long boots. "Francis," I whispered, and he spun round and came to me, sticking the dagger in his belt. "Penelope, I wanted you, but I never thought you would come." He sat down by my side, and I saw that the mossy oak seat with ferns growing in its crevices was fresh and new. "I wanted to warn you, Penelope," said Francis. "Do you know Arabella made a waxen image of you to do you harm?" I laughed. "How can it do me any hurt?" I asked, and I felt gay and light-hearted sitting there with Francis in the herb garden at Thacker's, with the pigeons flying overhead and the little fountain playing on the lawn. "She has it at Bramble Hall, and I believe she is up to some devilry, sticking pins into it, or some tricks of sorcery. Have you any pains, Penelope? Have you had headaches, or vomiting, or anguish in your belly?" he asked anxiously. "Nothing at all. I am perfectly well," I assured him. "Then she will be sure you are no human girl, and she will make other plans for your destruction. You must be on your guard. But there is great news. Do you know what is happening today?" I shook my head and looked round vaguely, trying to remember why I was there. "The Queen of Scots is coming to Wingfield Manor today. We are going to see her arrive, for although her removal has been kept secret, the Galloway harpist brought the news from Sheffield. She will ride with her retinue, the ladies who attend her, and her servants. We shall see her ride through the gateway. Will you come with me?" "Oh, yes, thank you, Francis. The Queen of Scotland to come riding along our lanes." Then it wasn't true, that strange foreboding. I wanted to run indoors and tell them all. I sprang to my feet, and Francis arose too, and picked up his hat. There was a click of the wicket-gate, and Tabitha came down the path bearing a large lidded basket, similar to the one I had been using. "There you are, Penelope Taberner, and we all in a ferment, with friends of Master Anthony's a-coming, and the Queen of Scots moving to Wingfield, and many a person walking the roads who may call and eat with us. Gather sweet bay and rosemary for the guest chambers to strew the floors, and feverfew for the grooms, for the stench of their feet in hot weather is more nor I can abide. Then cover the floors evenly." She then turned to Francis, who had picked up the basket. "You are wanted, Master Francis. Master Anthony is ready, all decked in his white satin, and he wants a word with you. Ah, there is such a to-do, and here you be as if nothing was." She flounced away and then turned back. "And get some cresses from the book and water mint for salads, Penelope, and look sharp." "Be ready soon, Penelope. Have a morsel of food and change to the riding dress of my sister Alice," Francis said, and he ran, whistling, down the garden path. I gathered branches of rosemary and stripped the leaves from the boughs of bay. Then I found the cresses and mints growing in the shallow pool of the brook's edge, and returned through the garden for a purpose of my own. I found old Adam Deddick working near, and I talked to him about the flowers that bloomed in the square box-edged borders, and as he talked, I helped myself to my favourites. "Mistress Babington likes a plenty of flowers," said Adam, "and so does Mistress Foljam. Here's a bed of sops and wine I've raised myself from cuttings from the Duke's place, and here's heartsease, although the young mistress calls them by a new fanciful name. Ponsies, she says, just like that, ponsies. I likes heartsease myself better. It's more comfortable." "I call them pansies," I interrupted, and he gave me a contemptuous glance. "Pansies, pipkins," he said scornfully. "Here's hollyhocks, and this is pinks, but what I like is Sweet Williams and Sweet Johns and Sweet Nancys, those three, nice homely names. I shall name my grandbabies after 'em when they are born." I gathered a good-sized bunch, but Adam shook his head at me when he saw it. "Mistress Babington don't like the blossoms picked by nobody but herself. Nay, wench, you shouldna do that. You can pick the wild uns, the foxgloves and poppies, but you mun leave these alone." "Dame Cicely would let me pick them," I protested. "Dame Cicely isn't mistress here," replied Adam stoutly. "Although she rules the roost in the house, she would rather have the yarbs from the herb garden, same as you've got in my basket. You'd best be off, and don't be so meddlesome picking and poking. Get you gone to Dame Cicely, for I hear her calling you." I hid my bouquet of carnations, lilies, and damask roses under the hedge and went indoors to my aunt. The kitchen was a turmoil of cooking and preparation, and Marjorie took my herbs and ran off to strew the chambers for me, for I was late. Francis came impatiently to ask me why I was not ready. I must change my dress and ride with him to see the Queen's passage. Mistress Babington would not go. It made her heart ache to think of the tragic Queen so near. The country was so fair, life might be very beautiful, but underneath were cruelties, she said. She herself wished that her Grace had remained at Sheffield, for Wingfield was too near Thacker's. She would stay at home and prepare the rooms for Anthony's guests, and make her simples and ointments which would be needed for the coming winter. Wild days and much illness had been prophesied, and she must prepare, for the people turned to her in their distress. I dressed in the little panelled room with a bare floor, next to Mrs. Foljambe's painted chamber, and I hid my frock in the folds of the bed lest anyone should find it and take it away, for I felt I could not return without it. Down in the courtyard was a clatter of horses slipping on the stones, and the cries of a farrier who fastened a loose shoe. Anthony, in his beautiful white satin doublet trimmed with gold, rode off with a groom. As the squire of the estate next to Wingfield, he must be there to welcome the Queen when she rode up with Sir Ralph Sadleir. The Earl, his guardian, had stayed at Sheffield, thankful to be rid of his important, capricious captive, and Sir Ralph took his place. It was the second time I had worn the green riding habit, and I dressed myself with pride, glancing out of the window to see Master Anthony's tossing feather as he rode down the lane. Francis was waiting with his bay horse and the little mare he had lent me. But first I ran to the hedge, stumbling over my skirts in my haste. I came back with a bunch of flowers. "They are for Queen Mary of Scotland," said I, and Francis was glad I had thought of it, although he doubted the wisdom of the gift. "They will be examined by Sir Ralph, lest you have hidden a letter inside," he warned me. Arabella came galloping on her brown mare from Bramble Hall to join us, and rode with us, for she had no escort. She seemed quieter, more friendly, but I caught a sidelong glance at me, cruel and swift, and then she turned her head with a queer smile. We clattered down the valley and joined a bevy of villagers on foot going to see the Queen. The news had leaked out, and all were hotfoot to see the royal captive. But some stayed at home. Women sat at their doors in the sunlight with their spinning wheels. What was a queen to them? They had their work to do. Children ran, playing leapfrog, and marbles almost under the horses' hooves as we rode by. The little girls curtsied, but the boys stood bold with legs apart, or they mounted their wooden hobby-horses and pranced along the grassy ways, imitating Francis, doffing their hats so that he frowned at them and then began to laugh and throw them coins. At the door of the inn, under a hanging bush, was a wooden bench where old men sat drinking their barley ale. They touched their hats, and Francis stopped to pass the time of day with them. I saw some young men playing skittles with wooden ninepins down an alley, and Francis watched them, careless of the time, till Arabella angrily reminded him where we were going. "I play with those fellows each week," he turned to me. "We have our score marked up on yonder sycamore, and I wanted to see how the game ran. Sometimes we play against other villages, but we always win, for we have a champion among us, Peter Dobbin, the smith. He can throw the ball at the cales and knock down every one, never missing." "Surely you can leave your childish games now," scolded Arabella, but he only smiled lazily at her. We rode up the long winding lane and over the crest by the headland, where a stack of wood lay ready for firing, tree trunks piled in a mass against the pale sky. "It's to send a warning of danger if a foreign foe should invade us. There are wood stacks on every peak of this country and all the way through the length and breadth of England," Francis said, pointing with his whip. "Wouldn't it be glorious to see them all alight?" "That would be war," I said doubtfully. "Who would invade England, Francis?" "Nobody would dare," cried the boy proudly. "But the Spaniards would like to try. We've pulled their tail too often. Anthony doesn't hate them, and there I disagree with him." We reached a great oak wood and threaded our way through ancient twisted oak trees where swineherds guarded their pigs, and woodcutters stopped their work to have a word. Francis talked to every one, finding the men from Thacker's who were there, asking after the herds. He was a friendly, happy person, careless of appearance, full of good humor. Arabella was in constant spasms of rage with him, for his unbuttoned coat, his free manners, but I thought he was right to treat the shepherds and swineherds well, instead of despising them. At last we came to the manor house with its high walls and great arched gateway. On the tower were the arms and quarterings of the Earl of Shrewsbury, and Arabella pointed them out with a proud gesture. But Francis's eyes were watching the serving men who ran hither and thither like ants, carrying meat for the great retinue of guards and the Queen's men, taking wheat for the bread, malt for ale brewing, oats and dried peas and round-bellied tins of wine which they stored in the undercroft, the vast arched room beneath the manor house. At the oriel window in the banqueting hall stood many men with plumed hats and slashed jackets of purple, plum, and brown, waiting to receive the queen. Then a signal was given, and they trooped out to the courtyard. There was a murmur of voices, and we saw a company of horsemen in the distance, 200 of them or more, riding rapidly towards us. We stood with a score or two of villagers, waiting, talking softly, thinking of the queen. We three had dismounted and given our horses in charge of a groom, so that we could be free to walk about and see the sights. Then a few horsemen galloped up and cleared away with angry gestures, as if they were enraged we had discovered their secret removal of the queen. Perhaps they feared there might be a plot to rescue her, for they drew their swords and kept a wide passage for the little group of women who rode disdainfully and slowly along the grassy road. A few of us cheered. Others remained silent, remembering dark deeds, and I heard murmurs of Bothwell, Darnley. They were not all on her side, it was evident. "Aye, poor soul, she's suffered more nor a bit," croaked an old woman. "Let's give her a cheer." But she was quickly silenced by a guard who pushed her aside. I clutched my bouquet of flowers and stood waiting my chance. I caught only a glimpse of the queen's chestnut hair, now faded and touched with gray, but I saw her pale, lovely face, and those bright eyes which looked round at the folk so calmly and with such assurance that several fell on their knees and asked her blessing. She smiled, and moved her hand in a little gesture of charming acknowledgment, and the wind caught the snowy lace of her cuffs and swept the silk folds of her black cloak aside. Then I tried to pass through the people with my bunch held out to the queen, and she saw me, and made as if to stop, and gave me a warm glance and little intimate smile which made my blood tingle. The guards marched on, and the queen was forced to move onward through the great doorway to the courtyard. One of the queen's ladies took my flowers, but at once a guard rode to her, bowed, and asked for them. "For Mary, Queen of Scots," I cried as loudly as I could, and he nodded, his face stern and unsmiling. "If Sir Ralph approves," said he coldly. The horses and men were safe inside the walls of the great house, a house which had none of the quiet homeliness of Thacker's, none of the friendliness and sweetness of the place I knew. Sheep were driven into pens in the fields nearby and cried mournfully. Horses were stabled in the great mews beyond the walls. Grooms, stablemen, shepherds, beggars, and peddlers all appeared from nowhere, attracted by the news that the queen had come, and there would be food and drink and leavings for many. I thought again of Thacker's. The best chamber was prepared, and some day, if God willed, she might escape from these great walls which are strong to resist attack, and yet had a secret outlet. She might escape. Once again the sense of unreality came over me, for I knew something the others did not know, and the knowledge made me feel faint. We mounted our horses and sat for a time looking at the ivied walls, thick and massive, listening, waiting, as if we expected something to happen. "Surely a small force of soldiers could steal her away," said Arabella. "Even our own grooms and labourers and the village men could bear her off. I would lead them if you were too cowardly, Frances." She suddenly flashed with temper, as if she expected us to break down the gate and carry off the queen. "Anthony should capture her as Bothwell did," she went on. "He could do it, not you." Francis shook his head and turned his horse towards home. "Our way is better," said he. "She will be hidden at Thacker's, under their noses. We can keep her in the priest's room if there is a search, or she could hide down the tunnel. It's the best plan of all." We galloped most of the way home, feeling happier for the thought of the queen's rescue, for it seemed easy to help her now she was so near. Only a long hillside separated us, and at Thacker's was freedom. Who would look in a little manor house, unprotected, with neither drawbridge nor soldier, only cattle and horses and haystacks to guard her? I changed my dress, for I was never comfortable in the long skirts and stiffly pleated ruff of the riding habit. Then I went back to the garden, looking for something I had left there. I crossed the lawn, but Mistress Babington, seated under the cedar tree, did not see me, although I passed very close to her and saw the book she was reading. Not even the birds were disturbed by my footfall, and I stepped light as air back among the rose trees and box hedges. The sun shone down. The garden was a haze of heat, much hotter than it had been on my ride. The beds of sweet william and carnation were heavy with perfume. I hurried along the path, intent on finding something I had left undone. I passed through the herb garden, and the thought flickered through my mind that I ought to help strew the floors. I could smell the strong odors of rue and wormwood, and I leaned forward and plunged my hands into the brown market basket full of peas. 12 peas in a pod, I murmured inconsequently, as I split open a brimming peascod. I made my wish, as all country-bred girls have done since time began, a wish that could never come true. I worked hard and took them indoors, wondering what Aunt Tissy would say at my delay, for surely dinner was over and the men gone back to the fields. "How quick you've been, my chuck," said Aunt Tissy. "Now will you gather me a bunch of parsley and a sprig of bay, and some fennel for the fish which I got from the fishman, and run down to the brook for some watercresses, my dear, for a salad." "I declare I know where you've been," said Alison, sniffing at me. "You've been shelling peas in the herb patch. Your clothes smell of lavender and lemon balm and feverfew, as if you'd been rolling in them."